All right, I'm going to go ahead and call the special joint meeting of the City Council and Finance Advisory Committee to order. City Clerk, roll call. Ruth, roll call.
Yes, sir. Morris?
Here.
Larson?
Here.
Smith?
Here.
Perkins?
Here.
McAdams?
Here.
Verbic?
Here.
Favor?
Here.
Mayor Barnes?
Here.
8 present.
Awesome.
Ruth, would you please call the roll for the fact?
Yes.
Thank you.
McGill?
Here.
Neely?
Here.
Parch?
Here.
Tarazinski?
Here.
Washington? 4 present.
Oh, she's here.
Awesome. All right, moving on to item C, public participation. I have Mark Charvat wanting to talk at item C. And just a reminder, it's 3 minutes for public participation, sir.
This has to do with the levy itself, and this is Finance Advisory Committee related. I have to tell you, I am absolutely repulsed by the fact that this council has been blind to what the library is doing when it comes to fiscal matters until the very end of the year, when the council traditionally rubber stamps the library tax levy. I'm going to point out some names here. We'll start with Alderman Favor. I remember when you said you ran for office, you felt that taxes were out of line and planned to do something about it. In fact, in 2015, you actually had the courage to vote no on the tax levy because of concerns over the library. A little bit of history for you. The vote was 5-3, by the way. It wasn't a rubber stamp that year like it is around here. Jacobson, Baker, and Favor at the time had the courage at that time to vote no. The reason, as I recall, was over the library levy. You can learn a lot from history. So now the library is coming back and asking you guys to rubber stamp a 14.1% increase in its levy. As Alderman Verbic stated last Monday, while the population of the city of DeKalb has decreased by 9%. If you add that up, you come up with a 23% levy increase based on population served. That is ridiculous. Talk to former Alderman Baker, who argued over and over again that this council is not mandated to approve the library levy. You guys can vote any way you choose. There were many council discussions on this issue, and I encourage you guys to look back at history. Alderman Morris, I have to tell you, I'm somewhat disappointed when you pointed out last Monday that library board meetings are open to the public, and you scolded the public for not attending. Yet you, the mayor, and every council member did not bother to attend any one of these recent library board meetings either. And now you all act surprised when the library is proposing this huge levy increase. Part of the blame also rests with our city manager and library director for not updating the council and the public for that matter. Last Monday, Alderman Larson and Perkins, while voting yes, proposed kicking the can down the road and discussing this next year. The time to do this is this year. Let's not kick the can down until next year. The library board needs to get back together. They still have time. They could revise the levy and present it to the council again. You guys don't have to approve this till your December meeting, as I recall. There's still time for this council to extend the deadline to vote for final approval of the levy. I'll have comments on the budget on the next item.
All right, moving on to agenda item D, consideration of the proposed fiscal year 2022 budget. City manager, kick us off.
Thank you, Mayor. It's been an eventful year. 2020 was an eventful year for different reasons. This year we have been in what prognosticators say is the recovery phase from 2020. The federal government has said that we are going to continue to change through this year and into next year and maybe even beyond. And I foresee that there's some truth to that where the city of DeKalb is concerned. So we've got about a 270-page budget that's inclusive of policies that the council has promulgated over the years. My intention tonight is to open chapter by chapter, fund by fund, and work from the beginning to the end.
Hey, city manager,
Yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I guess we're doing back-to-back public comments. I wasn't catching that necessarily. So I actually have two people that would like to speak publicly before you get too far into it. We'll go ahead and Mark Charvat can go ahead and speak as long as it's on a different item. And once again, just to remind you, you have 3 minutes, please.
This is on the budget itself, as I mentioned, if you were paying attention. Some corrections need to be made regarding the budget. Last Monday, City Manager Nicholas stated that the township multiplier was 1.0199%, which in his words was as close to 2% that you can get. In actuality, the multiplier of 1.01999 is closer to 1.02, so that's actually good news. Numbers do matter. A problematic issue that has not been addressed by the Finance Advisory Committee, which I'm glad to see you guys are here, it's been a few meetings since you've all gotten together, is the fact that this council voted to give away $241,000 from the American Rescue Act to the Kishwaukee Water Reclamation District. I don't believe you guys weighed in on this. Also, what's missing from your document, at least I couldn't find it, the city passed a resolution 2021-70 authorizing an American Rescue Plan grant to the DeKalb Park District in an amount not to exceed $50,000. I looked through the item you have in front of you, I don't see that on there. Why is this missing from the budget document in front of you? Both of these giveaways to these taxing bodies, these are both giveaways to taxing bodies that can levy their own taxes to deal with any shortfalls. That's $250,000 that this council voted to give away that could be used, if they chose to lower the tax burden on City of DeKalb residents. It could be used for things like maybe adding streetlights in the 1st Ward, or maybe these many potholes in the 4th Ward, Mr. Perkins. The city is planning a huge hiring spree, I noticed, adding 16 full-time employees in 2022. Yet there is nothing in this budget that addresses the long-term pension obligations that taxpayers will have to pay for these new hires. Where are these figures, and why are these costs not listed in the budget? Very problematic. Another thing I want to point out is, and Mr. Perkins, this is your area. We live in the same neighborhood. You live in SSA number 3. Have you bothered to look at the fact that residents of SSA number 3, your neighbors, have paid approximately $1,000 every year and are only receiving $500 in services every year? So we're paying $1,000 in taxes. $500 has been returned to the general fund from this SSA for the last 3 years, and it's in this next budget. That is not the proper use of an SSA. Either spend it in this area and don't return it back to the general fund. This council either needs to get rid of SSA number 3 or return this overpayment to the people who live in SSA number 3. It's being abused. Thank you.
All right, then I have Ernell Brown to speak on agenda item D. And Ernell, you're good. Yeah. Because we're already past C, we're on to agenda item D. Sorry, Ernell. With the city clerk not being here, I didn't get your public comment request form in time. And again, just a reminder, 3 minutes. Thank you, sir.
So I'm here again, almost the same issue, but it does relate to finance. And the only question is, how are we spending our money related to criminal justice, crime reduction, recidivism, and all these other efforts? What efforts are we making? And if we're not spending money there, how do we cry about crime? Are there specific line items or efforts or projects or programs that address these concerns? If there are not, again, how are we spending our money related to crime reduction? Police department is great, I know that's there. Aside from that. So for social service that's embedded in the police department, great, I know that's there. What else are we doing? There are community angles that we could utilize to deal with crime, recidivism, and crime rates, the social issues related to these things, and not just throwing that money at the whatever social service agency we believe can do it. Actually being actively engaged in the process of understanding what's going on, finding a solution, and implementing that solution. Understanding what's going on. We have 70 individuals on parole from here that are in Chicago, that lived here, because we don't welcome them back. We don't have nowhere for them to go, and we don't have a mechanism to welcome them back home. Aside from that, Actively, we have 156 individuals coming back to our community over the next 3 years. How much money are we spending to make sure that they'll be okay? Or was it their mistake? What are we doing? We're not even doing our fair share. And I believe with being a social service rich community, we can do better. I'd like to open conversations for that, and I'll be back next Monday to address this issue in a similar manner and offer an open invitation to the council, the advisory board, and the community to come visit and have a conversation about these things and how we can be more responsible for our fair share. Those 70 guys that didn't come back here.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. All right, City Manager Nicholas, sorry about that. Go ahead and restart.
Thank
See
you.
ya.
So I'm sorry.
Hey, what's your procedural order? I'm sorry.
We need to call this, we have to vote to bring it to the table or not.
The discussion that Ernell is?
No, the budget.
Oh, I don't know. Do you have to call a consideration to the table? That's the question.
It's, I don't have.
I mean, I can happily do it.
I don't have the agenda titles in front of me, but.
So it's consideration of
participate.
proposed, so I
Yeah.
can take a motion.
You
I'll
can
just
read
double
that,
down.
right.
I'll take a motion to bring the consideration before council for discussion.
So moved. Second.
I have moved by Alderman Perkins, seconded by Alderman Verbeek. Roll call, please.
Morris,
Yes.
Larson,
Yes.
Smith,
Yes.
Perkins,
Yes.
McAdams,
Yes.
Verbic,
Yes.
Favor,
Yes.
Mayor Barnes,
Yes.
McGill,
Yes.
Neely,
Yes.
Parch,
Yes.
Tarazinski,
Yes.
Washington,
Yes.
5
Wonderful.
Thank you,
Okay,
sir.
City Manager Nicholas.
Thank you.
Yes, it's all yours now.
Thank you. Well, the book you have in front of you covers all of the city's funds, and there are 32 of them. The revenues for all those funds, I'm not talking about fund balances now, projected for FY '22, which extends from January 1 through December 31st of 2022, are about $108,510,518, and they balance, there's a comfortable balance against the projected expenditures of about $106 million altogether. The transmittal letter, which opens the budget document, is intended to be a quick overview, mostly about the general fund, which is what most of our residents are familiar with, if only by virtue of the employees, the city employees that they see in fire, police, public works, administration, and so forth. All of those are funded, or generally all of them, some in public works are funded by the water fund, of course, but are funded by the general fund. And so I spend a fair amount of time talking about that, and then I talk more expansively about some of the key capital funds that we have, and special revenue funds that we've talked about in August, and which is also in the joint meeting agenda for the mid-October session that we weren't able to have. So my purpose tonight is not to belabor a lot of these points, but I did want to hit a few highlights. I'm repeating myself here to some extent. The council has heard this, but maybe people tuning in haven't. This year we have a couple of new funds, and they are important to at least highlight. One of those is the American Rescue Plan Fund, 110, which was set up initially as a holding fund for monies that were sent to us by the federal government as part of the rescue plan, which was enacted earlier this year. And it's maybe easy to forget, but as we sat here a year ago, there was no American Rescue Plan. We didn't have a SAFER grant. GEM-T monies were still very unpredictable. The council was making decisions about FY21, the fiscal year we're in right now, based on the hope that there would be some kind of strong recovery, probably in the second quarter of this year. So we're ahead of where we thought we would be in terms of overall revenue. That's a good thing. And what I've tried to present to you tonight is a budget that prudently shows how revenues that we have now, which we didn't anticipate from the federal government, state government, can be played out over multi-years rather than just this year. One, on page 3, early on, I hit you with all the color coding. And you've seen this before. It's updated somewhat from where it was in mid-August when we had the last joint meeting. In the same general magnitude of numbers. But as you can see, one important part of your financial policies addresses fund balances for our principal funds, especially the general fund. And there is there has been a very strong council intention to exceed the 25% minimum balance of the general fund. And that's in relation to the planned expenditures for the coming year. We have done that and exceeded that, and we will have exceeded that in the current fiscal year. And as we project out over the next couple of years by, I think, prudently expanding the federal monies, the ARP monies that we have received over the next couple of years, which we're able to do, and investing them wisely, that we can continue to see very solid fund balances in the general fund. I'll pause there if anybody has any questions of that. If you want to see how that is panned out, you can see in the summary below the numbers a breakdown of how by year that might play out, and also the hiring of employees. As you may recall, we were in, I'll tell you what, I'll direct you to the staffing plan, which is something that has already been referenced. Excuse me. As I live and breathe. Too many notes in here.
Page 14.
Yeah, I went past it. I've got notes in pages stuffed in here. Thank you. So if you look at the staffing plan on page 14, you see where we were in 2018. At that point, we were at about 226 persons. That's full-time equivalents, both part-time and full-time. And we got thinner and leaner in 2019 as a matter of necessity to deal with, it seems maybe out of our mind now, but we were in a fiscal crisis, and we were upside down financially in terms of general operations. So persons, bodies were sustained, new hires were not done, positions were frozen. And then last year, in addition to fiscal issues that we were still challenged by because of the COVID pandemic, we cut even further and got down to the lowest we've been in probably 8 years in the current 2021 fiscal year at just under 205. That was untenable. We were at the point in terms of overtime, which is often a marker of where we are in terms of the ability to perform our services at the budgeted numbers in fire, police, and public works. That was just insupportable. And so what I proposed in this budget is to fill the ranks again, fill some frozen positions. We were able to do that with the ARP monies. This is something that you're aware of and we have planned on for the last 3 or 4 months, and that is incorporated in this budget. I'm not going to say anything more generally. What I'd like to do is jump into the departments and take you department by department, if I may, in the general fund. Would that be agreeable to you?
And of course, finance, feel free to jump in anytime with questions that you might have.
Okay. All right, let's do that. And before we do, let's just take a trip around the town, which is the second chapter called The Community We Serve. There are some general observations about where we are demographically in terms of some of the strategic goals and strategies that have been developed in recent years and what we're doing to meet them, and some new things that we have identified as top priorities for us. and then our capital plan. Also, if you're not familiar with the city's budget, which has funds, departments, divisions, and so forth, there is a general guide to how we budget beginning on page 40, running through the balance of that chapter, which talks about each of the funds in a textual way, and then looks at all of the fund balances at a glance on page 46. You'll see that, and you'll see that again. And also recent activity in terms of revenues and expenditures, and then the ever-popular pie charts and line graphs and so forth. So there's a lot of meat there. I'm just brushing over it. And I'm trying to get to section 4, which begins on 55. And then we're going to jump generally into revenues in the general fund and expenditures. So I'll walk us through that, and then I'll pause, and we will have gone through the 5,000-foot level of the general fund, and we can get then down into the departments. But you can see some of our key revenues are first described for those people that may not know how we as a municipality budget for the services that we promise. Obviously, we have sales and use taxes. There are a number of components to that. Home rule tax is the 1% sales tax, restaurant bar tax. There are totals offered and also projected increases for the most part in each of those categories over the next 12 months. One thing that we saw last year, despite the COVID pandemic and the tremendous drop in the restaurant bar tax, is that the local use tax, which falls on internet purchases, was up. And we continue that to be up, but not as dramatically so in relation to the previous fiscal year. Hotel motel tax obviously also will be up, and was also very seriously impacted by the COVID pandemic. Property taxes. I'm just going to hold that for a minute, and we will get to that as we go forward. Intergovernmental revenue. The key there is the per capita tax, or our per capita share of the state income tax. If you look at that, you'll see, we went down in population, and 3,800 or so, and how come we're not seeing a flattening of the state income tax? Well, some curious things that we've noted over the last 12 months. Despite the COVID pandemic, our state income tax payments in late 2020 and into 2021 have been higher. This is before we really started getting into the recovery mode in March and April of this year. And notwithstanding what we've seen in terms of the census, which obviously registers in Springfield, so they count that number, that's a serious number. We are assuming that we didn't lose all those people, that some people were around here and just didn't send in their census forms, were not contacted, maybe they left for a while and came back. Which raises a question about whether or not we might want to, in the future, do a special census. I think it's premature to do that yet, but usually communities consider that about a year into the new year following the census, so they can begin to see other evidence that maybe the count is off and needs to be reviewed. Gross receipts taxes are our municipal utility tax, and some other lesser pieces of that. Municipal utility tax should be going up because of some of the new development, although we did give an abatement to FRAR, for instance, for a portion of their municipal utility tax, which is all new. Service charges, transfers, and the rest are also played out. So let's spend a minute on property tax, if we can. At your desk tonight, I've shown there are two pieces of paper that you have. One is a copy of the black box notice that will be published in time for our public hearing on the 22nd. And that reads like most black box notices. It doesn't tell you a lot. In some ways, it can lead to confusion. It begs a lot of questions. And in our case, the aggregate levy that gets voted is inclusive of the city and the library tax, property tax levy. So I thought it was important. And so I pushed on to the back and front of a page what that black box notice really breaks down to mean. And this will be discussed in more detail on next Monday on the 22nd, after the public hearing is had. But for your information, and the public will see this whole elaboration with the publishing of the black box notice. Some extra expense, but I think it's important that the public know what is truly happening. And then there's another piece which has some yellow coating on it that's at your desk as well. And I thought today, in case we get into this in particular, that I would show you recent levy and rate histories, and then also a breakdown of the city's share of the levy and what it means on the individual homeowner, which is critical. It isn't just about where the rate falls, but based on whether there's a multiplier, for instance. You could keep the rate the same, but if your projection, even if your projection of the community's EAV is absolutely dead on, if you don't include the multiplier, then you're going to see possibly more actual out-of-pocket dollars being paid by the average homeowner for the city. And so what I did, and this I think brings us back to the pension crisis that was mentioned earlier, and we've talked about many times here, and I've done some exhaustive background for you on. It still goes. And why is that important? If now let's just stick with what we've got here. So you see, the proposed city tax rate should result, and we won't know for sure if our best guess at this community-wide EAV is dead on or not. There are still appeals pending before the Property Tax Appeals Board. So, in any given year, that could be a difference of $500,000 to several $1 million in community-wide EAV. We'll see how we end up. We always try to bid low, so to speak, or guess low, so that we don't have major changes in the city's rate. But if the city's levy and EAV are as I've represented here, and including the DeKalb multiplier, homestead allowance and so forth, we are looking at about a $65 return to the homeowner who has this imaginary house. All right? That's assuming that the levy, which only includes about, say, 2/3 of our obligation for our fire and police pensions, doesn't change. If you were to pay the entire 2022 actuarial obligation of $8,123,459 versus your levy that we've talked about now for a couple meetings, which is going to be in the $6,845,000 range, our rate would go up to 1.16622 per 100 EAV. 1.162, and that results in an increase in taxes of about $690. That's not where we want to go. When I was running some levy scenarios back in late July, early August, I considered that if our EAV was going to go up because of the one-time bump from the recovered TIF and also a handsome bump from Ferraro's new investment and a smattering of new construction around town, about 3.2 million is what we figured. So we're going to be in the high 70 millions in terms of new construction value, and we captured all that. There surely must be some bonus that we can get here. Maybe we can get closer to absorbing in our property tax levy some of that distance between what the actuarial studies say we should be paying to get to 2040 with 90% funding, and what we're going to do, which is basically try not to raise the overall obligatory level, pay our share, but we're not gaining any more in terms of funding in the two funds. And so I saw this then. I thought you should see it now, because I'm seeing that some people are saying, well, why didn't we just capture at least that? Because if you recall what your bill said last year, you had two lines. It said City of DeKalb and it said City of DeKalb pensions, right? The pensions were the only ones that had any dollars in them, right? In a rate. It said nothing for the City of DeKalb. But that's because nothing comes to us that can be used for general operations, for the general services that we provide every day. That's not where we were 50 years ago or even 20 years ago, but that's where we are today. So I think we're doing all we can there. We definitely and desperately need a change in the actuarial method of calculating pension obligations. That has to be done by the state legislature. It isn't something you can change here, but it is something we and the Illinois Municipal League and labor organizations that we're allied with on this, particularly on this issue, we need to get the legislature to take seriously. All this federal and state money coursing through the financial veins of our public bodies right now isn't going to solve the crisis. It's just going to postpone our attention to them by a couple of years. So I in my color-coded sheet at the top of the budget, page 3, it all looks good through 24. 25, the ramp starts down again. And no matter what we see in the way of new development, it's hard for me to say this without choking on it, we will not escape that crisis. It will just keep eating at us and clawing at what should be a community gain. I'll stop. Questions?
Council, Finance Advisory Commission? Lynn?
I have one comment. I am the immediate past president of the local chapter for the State University's retirement system, the NIU retirees, and this is something we have been trying to lobby for, have been grappling with and struggling with for years. It is an incredibly serious problem. It cannot be overemphasized. I would like to encourage all of our citizens, I would like to encourage all of you to do what you can as citizens to absolutely get on the state legislature and get them to take action on this. They keep delaying it and kicking it down the road and hoping somebody else will take care of it. Unless it is addressed and addressed soon and significantly, it's going to come back to bite all of us in a very ugly way. This is not only our fire folks and our police officers. This is all the state of Illinois pensions are in deep trouble. Thank you. I hope I haven't gotten too far astray.
Thank you. I'm going to move on into the department level. That's where the spending occurs, if I may. Does anybody else have any questions so far? Okay. Each department has a flow chart of how the personnel in that department relate to one another and who is most responsible for the services of those departments. So I point that out. You can look at those at your leisure. Begin with the legislative department. The
Page
compensation for the
68.
elected officials is not.
Can you call out page numbers
Oh, sorry.
occasionally? Yep, just
Page
helpful.
68.
Save us a little time catching up with
Sorry.
you.
I will. page 68. A little bit of narrative there, talking about the duties and also the DeKalb Municipal Band. And it's one budget that actually went down a few bucks. Thank you. If you go to page 70, you can see what the band costs were. They remain constant, not increase those. Let me get into the city manager's office, and the city manager's office includes human resources, finance, the IT department and functions, and general management of the overall city organization. And there is some brief history on page 73, which takes you back to 1961 when the city first promulgated the council manager form of government, and we've had that consistently since. Each one of these department summaries has some reference to the accomplishments in the current fiscal year and some projections of goals for the next fiscal year. And the city manager's office is the same in that way. The number of people is projected to remain the same in the city manager's office. Human Resources is a mighty group of three that do a lot of things. For instance, right now we're coming out of an enrollment period. People get to pick, like people do in private life, the kind of coverage they want on their health insurance, and also some people get to opt out. We actually incentivize that if people want to opt out. Maybe sometimes a spouse or a companion has a better health plan, and that obviously saves us some money. The overall cost of our health insurance, which we'll get to later in the budget, is north of $30,000 a year. That's the raw cost. The employees pay 20%, the city pays 80%, so we pay the bulk of that. The Human Resources Department is the good hands folks. They are involved not only in the enrollments that I was referring to, but whenever people want to change things, they're the insurance agent. And in addition to that, they do a lot of training. Some of it is state mandated, some of it is something that we have done historically. They do the onboarding of new employees. They work closely with the Fire and Police Commission, among others. They also are there when people are transitioning to other employment or to retirement. In the course of the last 12 months, they've successfully filled 17 either frozen positions or positions that became open as a result of retirements, persons deciding to go on to other jobs. The partners that we have are very significant to us. We work with NIU and Kishwaukee Education Consortium, Kishwaukee College. We try to foster interest in our city and its employment, and we work with a lot of others around the region. Every year is a new challenge. This year we're obviously trying to hire up both the police and fire to replace frozen positions in particular, and also in public works. And we have to get out, we have to tell our story and hopefully elicit interest in us, and the HR department has a lot to do with that. Finance. Susan Hom is here, who is our Assistant Finance Director, and we have a small department that does a lot of work. Obviously, is involved in the day-to-day financing of operations. They're the folks that deal over the counter with people still coming in to our city hall, paying water bills over the counter, asking questions. Oftentimes, they just do some general informational work, because in the setup that we have in the new city hall, people walk in and they see a friendly face, they walk over to it, and maybe they needed to go over to the building department, but they are always greeted with somebody who is willing to help, and appreciate that, Susan, and all the help that you put in that. They're also the people that keep all the rest of us honest when it comes to spending, and spending the procurement system, spending within our financial policies, and obviously with our fund balance in mind, but also with our budget line item amounts in mind. And now, this year, as in the end of last year, they are working with grant monies that we haven't seen here in anybody's memory, the ARP money, Safer Grant, GEM-T monies. Pension burdens are particularly known to our finance office. They also are involved in our capital leasing program, which we'll get to in a little bit. Susan, do you want to add? Okay. Information technology. This year, 3.5 persons, FTEs. Next year, 3.5 FTEs. They perform a variety, if you look on page 88 and 89, a variety of functions, and including tonight's live broadcast of this particular meeting. And, they do a very good job with what they have in the way of resources. They also support other departments on a regular basis. Made a reference in the background, just so you know, the body cameras that our police are all wearing now need to be sometimes repaired, replaced, and so forth. They do things like that. When we moved from the old city hall to the new city hall, there's a lot of work that had to be done to migrate our server and its support over to the new city hall. In the FY22, we're looking for some upgrades in our enterprise software. We're finally getting into some pieces of those software packages that we hadn't had the time to train on or to implement, or the resources to implement in the past, so we're going to be doing that this year. Also participating in public safety upgrades, everything from mobile computer terminals and vehicles and squads to other kinds of equipment. IT. Police Department, the largest department in terms of funding support, and Chief Byrd wanted to be here tonight. He has a conflict tonight and was not able to make it, but we certainly are happy with his hire, and we have a new command staff, and I just wanted to point out our Deputy Chief, Jason Leverton, who is here tonight in Chief Byrd's place, and if you have anything you want to add, Jason, please do as I go through. The police department shows an increase in FTEs from, or actually it's yeah, I don't know. Now that I look at this, I'm wondering. Yeah. Back at about 87.5. One thing that we did last year started, and what we intend to expand in substance, is the Community Services Support Division. So we set it up last year, we plugged some people into it, and we had a number of transitions, people retiring, moving on to other things. We went from the beginning of 20, when we were at around, say, 61, and we went back to about 55 sworn officers, and now we're back to about 62, would you say, Jason? And the goal is 65, to hit the 65 threshold in 2022. in that process, we are going to gather more strength for that Community Support Services Division, which means people aren't just going to be filling in there, but they're going to be assigned to that division, and they're also going to have more active support from the telecommunicators and command supervision. So 2 commanders will be spending some time every day with that division. And of course, we'll have 2 embedded social workers as well. So I'm pleased to see the trend in that. As we were in transition to a new chief, things were still growing, but at a slower pace. I think that you're going to see things pick up in that area, and that's real important, I think, to the community. We also have a Police Citizens Review Board now, and we look forward to serving and working with that board in the future. I'm going to move to the Fire Department unless you have some questions about the Police Department. If you go to page 101, you see the flow chart for that department, and you'll notice we have 2 deputy chiefs. We're in the process of hiring a replacement for Jeff McMaster, who will be honored at the next regular council meeting on the 22nd. Looking forward to having a moment to be able to thank him and recognize him for his years of service. 3 battalion chiefs, 3 captains, number of lieutenants. We have a lieutenant for EMS coordination and fire prevention. And the EMS coordination is a fairly new position. That's helping us because in the past, each shift had people, we have firefighter paramedics, obviously, and each fills out reports with every transport to the hospital, to another clinic, when they go back into service.
Yeah, we actually have to leave the door open. We're
Yeah.
required to.
Yeah,
Great idea, though. Thank you.
maybe we can down the hall and just say something to them. Thanks. I think they're just
Yeah, I think they were leaving.
enthusiastic, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
I think they're leaving too. But the coordinator position is there to help provide regular day in and day out coordination with the medical staff at the hospital. And that will allow us to not only become better at what we do, but for them to better understand what our abilities are, what our limitations may be, and just in terms of resources and how we can best provide service to the patient. And that's been missing for a long time, and now we've got it back. Calls are up. As much as we are engaged in processing new hires as part of the new funding that we've received, we are finding it harder and harder to get candidates to sit for the exams before the Fire and Police Commission. This is also the case with police candidates. So we have to set up a list, and as we go through the hiring list and the Police and Fire Commission, which the Police and Fire Commission sets up, then we have to fill that list again and hire from that. That's how that's done. I don't know if people understand that. People don't just walk in off the street and say, I want to be a firefighter. There's a pretty rigorous process that they go through. Normally we have 3 or 4 dozen people on coming in and testing and trying to get on the list. This most recent run was about 21 persons. And we have done a lot of marketing, did a special film which we got out there. We're talking to the community college, KEC. We're trying to get into, we're going to be getting into the high schools and maybe even further down, just so people can understand, whether it's firefighters or police officers, what that profession is about and how that may be something they might consider. Public Works. Andy and Renee and Brian are here tonight. And the Public Works Department is built on collaboration and teamwork. It's an essential part of every day. We try to maximize our effectiveness by working effectively together. When it comes time to plow snow. We've got water department and street department and airport people behind plows, small and large and middle-sized. In and through the year, as we're doing larger projects, even in main breaks, sometimes with storm sewer improvements, sometimes with street patching, certainly with the leaf pickup. I mean, we're kind of all hands on deck. So I appreciate the work that is done, and Andy Rye is a big part of that. And with Brian, they're both the assistant directors in their own areas, and I thank them. They're both here tonight for their work. Community development. The last big operating department. Big as 7 people in 2021 and 7 people in 2022. We're on page 121 now. And I'd like to say that they have a big role in the pictures, the pretty pictures you see on 22 and 23 and on, and they do. But it's an even bigger team that puts these business attraction processes together, and retention is obviously very important as well. And we work with agencies outside of the city to do the attraction work. And we've been fairly successful in the last couple of years. We're also involved, the community development department is involved in day-to-day, week in and week out rehabilitation of older properties. Some of it can be TIF supported, some of it not. The CDBG program, which Joanne Rouse is the principal director of, also contributes to families that are trying to stay in their homes, to rehab them, to winterize them, to make them habitable. And I hope you'll enjoy some of those pictures. The building department is a part of that overall effort, and there obviously has been an increase in permits this year over last year, and Project Barb is probably the biggest new entry into our development world. And we continue to talk to other companies that are looking in that east side of town, both south and north of I-88. The Plan Commission is supported by the Community Development Department. Dan Olson, who is our planning director, is not here tonight because he's at a Plan Commission meeting in another location. And we'll try to get here.
He said he'd come after.
Come after, right. Still going on. All right. General fund support. So what is that? Well, it doesn't have a lot of spending categories, but it's a conglomeration of spending categories that touch all pieces, or most all pieces, of the city organization. So that includes health insurance and tax sharing agreements, surety bond payments, transfers out.
Page
So,
134.
134, thank you. And 135 are the numbers. And you can see those pension fund outlays that we have this year, that we had last year, and that we will continue to have. And you can see there is growth in those, and it's not abating. And that was what we were talking about earlier. There are also continuing tax sharing obligations, most of them through agreements that we have with the County of DeKalb for retail development that was promoted by county and city incentives in the last 10 or 15 years, some even longer than that, such as Market Square. Okay, that is the general fund. I'm going to pause.
Comments, questions?
Comments, questions?
Okay.
I'll keep going.
Take a drink of water, Bill.
We'll get to them. And then, Tom, do you have?
That's fine.
Okay. Let's dig into one of our newest funds, Fund 110, which is the American Rescue Plan Fund. I've taken some time to recapitulate information that was made available to the public on a couple of different occasions in July and again in August before the council, having to do with how did we get an allocation over a period of 2 years of $10,422,954. There are several pieces to it. One is something that the federal government called an entity-wide calculation. It had to do with revenue loss in 2020. We've been through that. The federal government, as you might imagine, this is, I think, a very wise thing for them to do. Rather than having each community, tens of thousands, come to them and say, here's how we're calculating that, they realized they would never get any money out the door. It would take years just to see, is this accurate, is it not? So they proposed a way to calculate the loss. And they didn't have to see a lot of receipts and so forth. They just said, here it is. And that formula is played out on page 137. If you haven't had time to look at that, you can see how we came to our particular allocation for revenue loss. But another big part of the ARP Act was prospective, not retroactive, filling the boot, so to speak. Oh, and I should mention something. None of those monies could be directly put into the reserve fund. That would have been easy, and from a financial standpoint, we could, check the box and moved on. It has to come in at the top of the hopper, so to speak, and then filter through the departments where the work is going to be done and where the positions need to be filled and so forth, services need to be provided and restored. So we've done that according to the federal guidelines. But prospective in the sense that the federal government wants us to invest in water, sewer, roads, and broadband. Those four things were highlighted in the original act and in every piece of guidance that we've received from the U.S. Treasury and from FEMA, both of which are active in relation to state and local recipients of these monies. We have already, the council has already approved the transfer of $1 million to the water fund, to capital fund, to in advance and in anticipation of setting up a program to help homeowners in particular replace their lead service lines. Now, we know a little bit of what's in the most recently passed infrastructure bill, and there's some additional funding there, and there'll probably be some other funding down the pipes, but we thought $1 million was a good investment to start. Thanks to Brian Favor and the Water Department for getting a survey out so that we could identify just how many of those services we have. We're not exactly sure. We have some that have been identified over time. There are others where we read the meter, we've never had a problem, never had to replace anything. We gave some detailed pictures and some other ways to identify whether you had copper or galvanized or lead. And people are finding those pretty easy to interpret, I believe. Isn't that correct, Ron? You're getting some responses which are interesting. Probably have a little less than we thought in the way of lead services, but we don't know the number yet. We'll be bringing a report to you as soon as we can, as the survey results are in and digested. Roads. Important thing to keep in mind here, we've got a lot of roads that pop and beg for resurfacing and lesser improvements. But the ARP monies have to be spent in qualified census tracts, which means that there are certain parts of town where they can be spent and other parts of town where they cannot be spent in terms of household income and the like. So with that in mind, we have saved monies that can be put to those purposes. And as I promised back in July, I think kept to that promise. Each time we have a proposal, we bring it to you. You get to see whether that matches up well with what the overall purposes are, both from your standpoint, from the federal government standpoint. So we can continue to do that. Any questions generally about the ARP monies? something new since we had the last joint meeting in August. It's a SAFER grant. And kudos to the fire department for pulling together an application that impressed the Federal Emergency Management Agency. We were awarded a grant of just a little over $2.7 million to be allocated in 3 installments this year, next year, and the following year to help our fire department get to that threshold that we had talked about last December, a year ago, when we were doing the multi-year collective bargaining agreement, so that we could finally get into the 20th and pretty darn close to 21st century when it comes to staffing of our apparatuses that arrives at a fire, right? And without going back into all the history of it, but we run a 2 and 2, so we run 2 on an engine, even though the OSHA and the American Fire Institute recommendations are for a minimum of 3, and 2 on an ambulance, which all works well theoretically and on paper unless there's an ambulance call a few minutes before the fire call. If the ambulances are all taken, and if the fire call is squarely centered in one of the zones, say the north side where Station 3 is, we're sending 2 people. You need 3 to run a hose line. So you get the issue. We've been doing this for 20 years, and we've finally got the means, we've got the commitment to fix that, and we're doing that. And we will, as soon as we can hire up, we will do this. Now, important thing, there's no time to waste. If by the end of February, I can't remember the exact date, we have not hired those 9 that this money can go to, there will be a pro rata reduction in our allocation that then will play out over 3 years. We're doing everything we can. The HR department, the Fire and Police Commission, our fire department, our staff, we're doing everything we can to move that, press that along, and we'll be keeping you informed of how we're doing. But it is a struggle right now for the reasons that I mentioned earlier, and we're doing everything we can to attract people to the profession. Okay. SAFER grant details are on pages 142 and 3 with a spreadsheet of, so their allocation, if we can get the full grant nailed down by the end of February, then the allocation is so much a year. The first year's allocation is $851,565, and that's shown on page 144. The Ground Emergency Medical Transportation Program, the GEMT. Lynn, have I been speaking in acronyms tonight?
I won't hold it against you. You got a glossary in the back. So.
Thank you. Try not to. But we came to identify that about the middle of last year, came to identify that particular program as maybe being something that we can benefit from. It helps pay the difference between what we're able to charge for to reimburse us for our ambulance calls and the true cost. And there's a significant difference in between. And we are, on page 145, I've told you what that difference is. So if the ambulance trip was, the billable cost would have been $1,879, we might get somewhere around $211, $225. So we're leaving a lot of money on the table, and this helps us close that gap. Not perfectly, but it really does. We've received some of these funds this year. We expect now that we've re-upped and we're on this program now for a full year, and the state is aware of us and what our experience is, that we'll continue to get regular monies that could be anywhere from $800,000 to $1 million in the course of a year. And we have a new fund for that, so that the money doesn't just fall into the big bucket and it goes here, there, and everywhere, but it goes primarily toward these EMS-related needs and services. We have a transportation fund, and that fund is one of our biggest funds in terms of annual spending, and it supports, on the basis of primarily federal grant assistance, our transit program. If you look on pages 148 and 149, you get a glance at just how big that budget is. It's that budget that ultimately will be helping to fund the location and the building of a new transit center. And by the way, on that score, we'll be coming back to the council maybe in December, Brian? One of the meetings in December with where we are. And the consultant has done some work, has a preliminary report, and we'll look at that. This first step was we went backward to start with some of the principal questions, such as, so what are the needs of our community at this point? And so that's going to be a big part of the focus of this report. All right. Now, we're going to get into some of the capital funds that are most important in our road repairs, which is of interest to probably every resident and business in town. Motor fuel tax fund, capital fund in particular. So we receive a per capita allocation of Illinois motor fuel tax revenues, and this is not to be confused with our local fuel tax revenues, and these are per capita based. We receive monthly revenue from the state, and that proceeds through the year. Sometimes, and this happened in the last couple of years, the state legislature passes a capital bill, and that involves their issuance of bonds. Local municipalities can receive an allocation of that bond revenue. There's a procedure, fairly detailed procedure for applying for that money, but we were able to get some of that money in the last couple of years, and it's going to help us do some bridge replacements. As you can see on page 151 in that little table, we'll complete the engineering in 2022, and next year do the bridge replacement on First Street and Lucinda. As the bridges span the mighty Kishwaukee. In addition, every other year, we have been alternating between the motor fuel tax fund as the principal funder of our street maintenance program, and the capital fund as in the following year, the chief funder. And this is just because the revenues don't come in fast enough in either of them to fund on a regular basis the $2.25 million now that we're trying to spend a year on street maintenance. There just isn't enough for that revenue, so we alternate between the two. But the motor fuel tax fund was designed by the state to be one of the principal sources of that funding, and it is. Just last meeting, last week, we did the annual agreement that we do every year with the State of Illinois Department of Transportation to allow us to spend those monies. Okay. Special service areas. Each of these is a fund.
Got a question?
Yes. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Tom.
Just, the per capita item comes up here
Yeah,
again.
it does.
Similar to the income. And when they talk about the 22 number and our population decreased to 8.5%
Yeah.
or so, right?
Yeah.
Are they working with the new number as this happens in 22, or when will they apply that new number?
It's going to be applied, I think, through this year, the old number, money is coursing, coming out, and then it may even be the December payment becomes the new number.
Okay, so for next year, for the
Yes.
22 budget,
It was
it's
the
all new?
40,290.
Okay. So we're anticipating a
Yeah.
8.5% reduction?
Now, that's the reduction in population. It
Right.
may not be the reduction, because the per capita allocation may go up, not just, we have a set per capita number of people, but the allocation may go up depending on the resources that the state sees coming into the Treasury Department, so they can give us more. And they tell us through the Illinois Municipal League and also through some of the Treasury circulars that tell us about what that's going to be. So we're, I have to say, we're pretty much slave to that prediction. We don't have the numbers that they do. We don't receive that money. So we, you know, from the, every time you go to the pump, you're paying so much per gallon. It's
Right,
not,
right.
regardless of the price.
Right.
It's the number of gallons pumped. And so that's something that they get, we don't necessarily see.
Okay. So the 8.5% reduction in
Yeah.
population is in this number?
Yes.
And it still goes up, so they're anticipating a
Yes.
pretty good increase in
Yeah,
fuel?
the
Okay.
municipal league, the municipalities have different fiscal years. We're on the calendar year, a lot of them are on the state fiscal year, July 1 to June 30th. So we get information almost on a monthly basis about what the per capita allocation will be. And it's been up and down this year, projections. Okay, anything else on that topic? Special service areas, created by council action after public hearings. Monies that go into some of these smaller ones in particular, was referenced earlier. Sometimes we work with a neighborhood to see if, as an example, a couple of these relate to common areas that maybe there isn't a homeowners association, but there's cul-de-sacs that need, and areas around signs that need to be cleaned up, and homeowners are willing to tax themselves, basically. They're not large amounts. Sometimes we're in the process at this time of the year where we've engaged some of the residents, and we're talking maybe about doing some additional plantings, some better trimming and the like. And so we are doing our best to create a fund that doesn't go up if we can help it, and is properly employed during the year. Sometimes there's a production, a development. Most recent one, say in the Knolls, was the home 2 suites, and that, as you may recall, took out an island for much of the year. It wasn't anything we could spend on it. Toward the end of the year, it was restored by the developer, and now going forward, we have a fund where we can see the maintenance of that. One of the special service areas has been closed, and that was the 924 Greenbrier, which is Fund 248. That's the area number 28. That's on page 154, by the way. That was to help one of the fraternity houses meet the state's Greek housing sprinkler requirement, and that has been paid off, and so we're going to close the fund. It was a one-lot special service area. Then we have 2 other new ones, the Market Square Special Service Area, Hunter Ridgebrook Special Service Area. The cooperation with the owners of the Hunter Ridgebrook has been an issue in terms of the fruitful employment of that money, and we're hoping to have good projects there in '22. In the Market Square area, you will see some major resurfacing that will occur next year. There was some resurfacing done by some of the private businesses out there. We didn't want to get in the way of, and didn't want to do our share if they were going to do some of their own, and so they did that. And then next year we will have a fund to do all of the common lanes that course through there, and they have taxed themselves for that, so we have the money on the basis of the value of their properties. Okay. All right, another special revenue, which we've talked a lot about here in the last almost 40 years, the Central Area Tax Increment Finance Fund, TIF number 1, page 163. established back in 1986, and it comes to an end in just about a month and a half. And it's no longer going to function for redevelopment by statute or in any other meaningful way. There will be one more tax sharing from that. Those checks will hopefully go out by the end of the year, or there is a possibility of a carryover which we can do to pay those. It's a matter of calculating the precise amount. And also there are not in this court, the state court, any property appeals right now that would impact the TIF increment, but there is the possibility of some adjustments on individual properties. We put, if you look at page 167, you see we've got a little under $22,000 pocketed for any payments that might have to be made by the city to satisfy private property owners that have a claim on the residual. And if any part of that is spent, fine. If it isn't, then we'll port that to TIF 3, which we can do by statute. So we go from about $7 million a year, at least until before TIF 3 started bleeding through some of the parcels, to a little over 300 parcels a year in TIF 3, and that begins on page 168. And TIF 3 going forward will have a very modest annual increment in the 350 to 400,000 range initially, and then this coming year we will begin the revenue sharing per the intergovernmental agreement that was agreed by all the local taxing bodies that are part of the Joint Review Board. And that'll start at 30%, and after a couple of years that'll go to 50%. So this is going to be a very small engine, but it will still be able to generate support for facade improvements, the Architectural Improvement Program, the AIP program, which it does about 7 or 8 different grants. You see them portrayed on page 169 at the top. That's what we've done this year. Mostly small amounts relative to bigger projects that have been done in our TIF program over the years. And maybe 1 or 2 larger private rehab projects, but we have to keep in mind what the limitations are of our annual revenue. There will be one bump as we port the money that isn't claimed from TIF 1 into TIF 3, and then it's all in TIF 3. There's one big project left, and that's the reconfiguration of the downtown streetscape, and that's going to be what most of that project money is for. And there's still some last payments on the old Moody property and a couple of others, final payments, payouts that by agreement were extended into 2022, even though the work that it would be TIF eligible was basically done. But we tried to place our financial obligation out a little bit further to help with our balance. Community Development Block Grant Fund, page 171. I've mentioned Joanne Rouse's involvement with this. We received in the current year about $544,000. We received quite a lot of money in addition to that in 2020, which were very helpful. There was a COVID-based higher allocation by the federal government in 2020, which helped persons in the greatest need. This provides support for a lot of things, and on page 171 we've identified just some of those. We support low-income children, daycare to school, summer meals program, University Village, lots of services for elderly, homeless, and survivors of domestic violence. We don't provide those support services. A lot of local social service agencies do, and we help fund portions of their annual services. They apply under guidelines that are prescribed by the federal government, the HUD, and there's a careful review. There's only so much to spend, and they're all vetted. Each in their own get something that the committee feels is fair and reasonable, It doesn't go very far, but it helps. We have a housing rehab fund, which is a carryover from some years ago when we received some assistance from the old Community Development Assistance Program, the CDEP program. Some of you may recall that. And we gained some revenue in there every year, not much. In addition, some investment income, which hasn't been much in recent years. Sometimes there's a reuse of dollars that were loaned out, and money's come back. It doesn't amount to much. On page 174, we use it judiciously, mostly to demolish very small, decrepit old houses that have been neighborhood eyesores. And that's, we may do one a year, something like that. We're just keeping it alive because it helps one or two families every year. Foreign Fire Insurance Fund, the state statutes that created this have led to funding through a 2% tax that is imposed on gross receipts of fire insurance premiums provided by insurance companies not located within Illinois. So it's a fairly long reach, but it has to be spent, in our case, on property located in the city. There's a prescribed number of people on the fund board, and the board every year has some money to put toward the uses and the benefit of the fire department. Some of the most recent types of expenditures are itemized on page 175. The dollars, not a lot, about 72,000, maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less in any given year. State statute is very clear. This is something that the council basically doesn't control. You vote the budget. You can vet, and then you can encourage me to go to meetings if you feel appropriate to talk about some of the things you'd like to see. But in the end, it's for the department's uses, and they've been very responsible. As you can see, they've very often helped us with expenses that would otherwise be considered the general city expenses, including the annual fund audit. Medical supplies and breathing apparatus, they've been very, very helpful in that respect, and in really bad times, those funds have maybe been the only way we can get certain small capital items. I appreciate that. Let's talk about debt service. Unless you want me to pause. Okay?
Good.
So we have a number of outstanding bonds, and I have played out in a chart on page 179 where we are with our aggregate annual allocations and what is left in terms of our overall debt. And the debt in the past has been separated into the general obligation fund debt, and then also the TIF debt. The last TIF bond payment was made this year, and so with the closing of TIF 1, we close out that bond. It's redeemed. I've broken down on page 178 the individual bonds, what they were created for, the interest rate that was part of the bond debenture, and I've also made a reference to what I thought was, on council's part, a fairly clever way of diminishing for 1 year our out-of-pocket costs for the general fund, and that was that scoop and toss that we did, and you can see it referenced there. And I don't have much else to add. Capital projects, I referenced Fund 400, which is on page 183. So this next year, in FY22, a lot of our street maintenance program will be funded out of this fund. And we have a local fuel tax rate. That's 9.5 cents a gallon now. We split that 3 ways. 7 cents goes to streets, 1.5 cents goes to the airport, and 1 cent goes to vehicle replacement. So you see that source of revenue appearing on the revenue side of the budget for each of these general areas. We also have some grant money. We have that member money that came from the Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity, from the support of Representatives Demmer and Kiker, which we're using for a variety of local infrastructure improvements. We are going to be continuing with the installation of signals at Illinois 23 and Gurler. If you've been down there recently, you saw that one of the really critical things that we had to do was to widen the road, particularly on the east side, so trucks making movements into and out of Gurler had the ability to do that without ending up in the ditch or snarling traffic and creating erratic driving in that area. Also, the completion of the Afton Road, which is that rural road that is running east-west on the east side of the Meta development area. We are going to have all the aggregate down. The asphalt lifts will happen next year after there's settlement. And we had the road cored out. We had filled in some loose peat areas and so forth with heavy aggregate. We were ready to start laying down the aggregate, and then 2 weeks ago the rains came and lasted all week, and that created a muddy mess, and you can't just throw rock on top of that. We had to core that out again, try to get down to stable ground, and they had to build that back up and layer it with clay, and then they had to come back in, and there's some aggregate going down now. We'll get that done, but it's going to be too cold for us to do the asphalt layers. But that would be nice. I attend the Afton Township Board meeting on a regular basis, and it's a regular part of the dialogue there. Capital Equipment Replacement Fund. So this has existed for some time, but in recent years we have looked at and embraced, to some extent, leases as a way of tackling fleet problems that had accrued over a generation, but there was no chance of us making any kind of inroads in replacing the old and with new on a regular basis, and if we had to pay out of pocket for every vehicle, every big truck and so forth. So we, a couple years ago, with the council's support, approached those entities that provide leases. Some cases a mix of leases and outright purchases, and we're trying to find a balance in that. If you want to see where we are in terms of debt, on page 186 you see a chart, and I would amend this in one way. The estimate that we had, if you look in the far right column, it says population. Well, obviously now in the next fiscal year we're at 40,290. The actual per capita debt, based on what our total outstanding costs are for the leases and the actual costs are of bonds, is $306.99 per capita. So you see a declination here in the actual per capita debt. And we want to keep that going. We want to keep that moving down, 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 while at the same time balancing the need to replace vehicles, whether they're squads, whether they're certain types of utility trucks that are necessary for public works and for other departments, or the bigger types of equipment. We just, as you know, purchased one of the larger dump trucks that we can use for utility work, but also use for plowing, particularly out in the rural areas of our community. So that's the best portrayal of the vehicle-related leases, and that is long-term capital debt, because we're using that money to purchase capital items which are not expended in a year or less. So we wouldn't have to show chainsaws on this, but we have to show vehicles. Okay. Let's get to water, and let's take our time. Hi, Dan. How'd it go? Good. Okay. Water operations, well, we have three funds that support our water operations. The general revenue fund, which we call water operations fund, a water construction fund, which is the vessel in which we keep our impact fees from water, which have not been growing much in recent years because we're not building many houses. And then the water capital fund. And the council, a number of years ago, was very concerned about, and Tom, I'm setting you up here, the fact that while we were making commitments on an annual basis to certain water capital projects, such as replacing water main and so forth, it seemed that we were never going to catch up. We were going slow, and so the council voted a multi-year increase in the user fees, and that was to be used judiciously to every year make transfers to the water capital fund. And in 2016, there was an increase of 2.2%, and then the 4-year increase that was really the trigger for the transfers of substantial user fees to capital purposes for the water system began in 2017, 18, 19, and 20. It was 4.5% a year. This year, remember we had a conversation about mid-year about whether we wanted to tie any further increases to inflation. The council thought yes, but also wanted us to bring this back every year so we could talk about it. Are we going too far, too fast, or not far enough? And the 2.5% increase is what was voted by the council for 2021. Now, something to note as you're looking through pages 192, 193, and 194. 192 and 193 show you operating revenues, operating expenses. And you see that we are aggressively sending money out to the tune of, if you look at the bottom right of page 193, $2,251,505 in the next fiscal year for capital purposes to the water capital fund. Okay? But it doesn't show you where we are with a water balance, water fund balance. And that's partly because of guidance from the GASB violence, guidance. It is violence, I guess, in a way, depending on your point of view. We have now the obligation to show, because it's an enterprise fund, to show what our overall fund balance is, which counts assets in this. And so if you look on page 194 at the top right, even with that $2,205,601 going out, which is more than we're bringing in user fees total, the fund balance still looks pretty darn good. 21,835,000 to start, and by the end of next year projected to be about 19 million. Well, so what is the actual operating balance? We had to go back before the GASB addition to 2018, maybe, was it, Susan? Or 2019?
Well, we went all the way back to 16.
It went back to 16 when we started the increases. At the end of this year, at the end of 2021, you might want to make a note of this. If we subtract you see in the red on page 194 again, up at the top, it says 2021 projected activity, and in red it says that the money that we're putting out is causing a shortfall in the general, the parent fund, if you will, the water operations fund, of about $2 million. That's by design. We're trying to put that money into capital, and I'll show you what those purposes are. All good purposes, like what happened in Tilton Park this year. If you subtract that from the balance, which starting the year was $5,160,295. Tom, $5,160,295 was the starting balance for 2021. We subtract the $2,087,343. We get an ending balance for this year of $3,072,902. Not bad. But if you look at the next year, where we'll continue to throw this money out toward the Water Capital Fund for all good purposes, we're gonna take another chunk of 2.2 million and change. You subtract that from the $3,072,902, you get $821,397, which is as low as you want to go. That's just the off-balance, budget calculation of where we are in terms of operating. We could continue every year to spend, and that, it would take a while to spend down that 19 million, but from an operating standpoint, we're upside down. I would not recommend that, and here's what I do recommend. I recommend that we look very hard at, probably the first quarter of this year, coming year, and do some projections about what we might need to do over the next couple of years to shore up and stabilize the bottom, put a floor under the operating piece, and still meet capital obligations. Now, there'll be public discussion about this. We've pegged a certain percent. We may have to reconsider that. Otherwise, the two ends may not meet, or look at more revenue, or any other combination of those things. But I think that's a good public discussion to have. I'm not prepared tonight to offer that to you in terms of options, but I think that's something that we ought to do, and we can invite the Finance Advisory Committee to join us.
Just a comment. From an overall perspective, the water fund's in excellent condition. You combine all three funds. The program, as it was adopted by the council and supported by the finance group, was to build this capital fund and allocate it for capital purposes and to ensure it was segregated from operations. So there couldn't be any drawback down to operations, right? So capital's clean, and with the help of the water department and the city staff, they've really accomplished what that objective is, almost to its complete intent. So this has really been cleaned up. The second thing, from an operational standpoint, the policy, when it was adopted, called for a 25% reserve balance in the water operations, similar to the general fund operation, 25%, same kind of concept, to cover any interruptions, any problems that would occur. And anything above that 25% balance would be transferred to the capital fund. So using city manager's net result of $820,000 at the end of '22, you're very close to that 25% fund balance. So operating cost is about $4 million. So that's going to get you very close. It can be cleaned up to what the right number might be, but it's an excellent position, and your capital fund then will continue to be funded from your water operations, which is generating $1 million to $1.5 million in profit, plus what you're transferring in the revenue piece from the incremental pricing that you've established over the prior 5 years, which this year is some $800,000. So it's in pretty good shape, maybe with the exception of this whole concept of lead piping. That's a whole different topic, but that's what it was intended for. It seems to be working very well, and it's really been improved and cleaned up as far as this reporting is concerned.
And I would thank Brian Favor for his expert management of this. He's the one who sweats this every day, and I'm just taking the front here tonight. Thank you, Tom. If I may just talk about the projects for next year, you're aware of what we're doing on Joanne Lane this fall, and unfortunately it's a project. We got the water in before the bad weather hit in the last week or so, but we're not going to get the street paving done, so people are going to have to live with. We're going to plow it. We're going to keep it drivable as much as we can. We're sorry for the inconvenience. We'll hit that, close it up in the spring as early as we can. Do what we can also to. We're going to continue doing that kind of work, replacing the mains, and we were also going in our system. We take the service line from the the corp at the main to the B-box in the yard, on the private side of the sidewalk, usually somewhere in the yard. And we were doing that on the Joanne Lane project. We try to continue to do that. That saves a lot of expense for the homeowners who otherwise would have to open up a portion of the street, which is the biggest cost, particularly in terms of repair. And then if they had happened to have a lead service, we'd have copper come into the B-box, and we're going to try to do something to incentivize them as going forward here to, maybe with some of that ARP money, to do it right, take it all the way to the meter at the house. But we're also doing some other things. On page 198, you see the water main replacement. We're continuing Kishwaukee Lane, but also over Lewis and Vienna, on the other side of town, South 6th Street, Maplewood Avenue, a variety of places, scattered site. But most of it is going to be in the Joanne Lane area, and that's a lot of, we've done a lot in the last 5 years to help with that. We're coming back to 13th and 14th, though, Alderman Smith, to do what we've been talking about for a couple of years. And that's the biggest project in the 2022 timeframe.
Bill, along that line, if we're doing lead, will we do the same?
We'll do the same. We'll bring, correct me if I'm wrong, Brian, but as far as I know, we're bringing new services from the main to the B-box. Is that correct? Okay. And if we see something, we'll start working things out as we go along. We'll know beforehand from our survey, and in other ways, we'll connect people before you actually have a contractor out there. We'll make contact. Don't know at this time how much of that is lead, do you know?
There's some lead services that we've identified there. There'll be a survey going out to all the residents on 13th and 14th, an additional survey beyond the one.
Okay.
Bill had mentioned, so we can specifically get into each one of those homes, identify whether it's lead or not, and be prepared before the project starts next year. As well as the time.
Thank you.
Okay. Airport fund, are we ready to move on? Okay. Oh. Tom, did you have something? No. Okay. Airport fund, the airport's had a couple challenges this year, and thank you, Renee, for accepting the challenges and working as best you can through them. Obviously, the paving was a big one. We had a period of time when to be exact, with the resurfacing of both of the runways and some of the taxiway areas, there were a total of 79 days, I believe, in which there was some construction going on, and there were 16 consecutive days in which both of the runways were closed. That cost fuel money. We also felt obligated on the basis of our leases to rebate the equivalent cost of the rent for those 16 days to the T-hanger lessees and anybody who had a rental agreement that called for that kind of reimbursement. And we've done that, or are doing it now to complete that by the end of the year. So a couple big hits on the cost side that we knew were coming, but we didn't know how long it would take. We were hoping for the best, but well, maybe we can get it done in 5 days. No, 10, no, 16 days. Also some intermittent closures since then, but not such that you have to go 5 consecutive days before the lease kicks in that rebate. But a day here and a day there, once the paving was done, and the shoulders, not unlike what happens on a rural road, the shoulders have to be patched, and we have to bring in fill, and then they have to have gravel, and they have to be rolled, and so forth. And there was some damage to some of the lights that light up the runways and taxiways, and those had to be fixed. So it's just anywhere from $75,000 to $100,000 was a hit for us, and that's not something we budgeted for. We're doing a little bit better. I've got a very detailed breakdown in front of me, which I didn't make for all of you, month by August, September, October in particular, on that Renee created on the fuel, which is something that we live and die on. It's the two major sources are rent and fuel. And we held our own in late summer, and then took the biggest hits in October. So we've got a month and a half. Depends how early the hard winter comes in as to how we're going to do. Usually this time of year, wind is a factor as much as the snow is, and really heavy windy days, there isn't much going on, but we have everybody geared to help in every way we can, and we're still getting some corporate jets in and out. We're going to try to end strong. Internal service funds. Let's talk about comp and liability. So I'll just stick with what you have. Page 207. We just recently had an item on the council agenda, which was the award of a contract with a new vendor that would be supporting our comp and liability services, and we're looking forward to working with them. We have seen an increase in costs in recent years that we're trying to address. The price that we got from the new company is less than last year's cost by a significant amount, so we're looking forward to working with them. The health insurance fund is maybe something more of you are most familiar with, and I thought I'd just take a few minutes on that. I may need help handing out a few things. Josh, you want to do? I'm going to give you two things that, yes, maybe this first, and then this second. I better keep one. Give me one of those. Thank you. All right, here's what I'm doing. So we have a relationship with a third party, and on the health insurance side, and we have a committee, a committee of employees that help us on a quarterly basis, I believe. Quarterly basis for the Health Insurance Committee. Jeff? Yeah. Just track our spending, track the services provided, and the contributions. And a couple of things come into play as we've talked about tonight, and one is what's a reasonable balance to hold for that fund, which is a very important fund. When you're in need, that needs to be solvent and funded. And the current policy requires members to have a minimum, members meaning us, the corporate members, to have a minimum of a 2-month reserves. That's 16 2/3 of the annual cost for what may ensue. Our monthly cost is over $400,000. So the blue and white sheet that you got tells you, on the basis of claims and our experience, what our fund balance requirements are for 2021. And this changes through the year and through a period of years. If you look on the top chart, it says IPBC, that's the risk pool that covers those costs. And in the far right column, it says fund balance requirement. So at the end of August, the fund balance requirement, which is variable, was $752,435. we have at the IPBC in their risk pool, which earns a lot more, right now, nobody's earning a lot of interest revenue, but earns a lot more than we could individually. 1.678 million, and that goes up and down as well through the year based on experience and also on payouts and so forth and pay-ins and when they happen. But so we've always aimed at about $1 million, which is a good threshold. It's a little bit more than what the 2 months worth of cost would be. So I've handed out to you is an actual experience graphic, and then also the reference to the policy that you have, which I've highlighted in yellow. We could go up to 50%. That's not been our policy, but some places would do that. If we went that high, we'd probably want to have a conversation with our employees about how much we're, you know, what's it costing us, what's it costing them. So, questions about that? Okay. Fire and police pension funds. We spent some time talking about that tonight. This is the play out on pages 212 and 213 of what the two funds, the police first, and then on page 214 is the fire pension fund. And these have large fund balances, but they have to. We're obligated through actuarial requirements defined by the state of Illinois and national insurance bodies to keep those large balances. And as you know, we're not growing in any rapid fashion in terms of the percent of funding, and that's a struggle for us right now. Page 215, DeKalb Public Library. So we have a library fund. We perform financial services for the library, and Susan and her team are involved in that on a regular basis. In addition, as you'll see in the spreadsheet that shows their budget, which they give us, 216 and 217, you see what their principal and interest obligations are, what the levy is. It's proposed, that's on page 216 on the top. They had proposed $2,700,708 for 2022. It was said earlier that we can deny that levy. We can't. You can use a bully pulpit, though, and still comply with state law to have conversations. And I can assure you that the mayor has opened those conversations, and we'll be having some discussion with the library board representatives this week. There's also been a fair amount of conversation publicly and over the last couple of weeks as well. So the important thing, I think, and here's the bigger context, in the context of rising community wealth that's as represented by equalized assessed valuation, there is an opportunity for taxing bodies to continue to levy increases and create levy increases, all the while making sure that that rate, which is really what affects the local taxpayer. They may not know the difference between a levy and a rate, but when they get their tax bill and they read across and they see who is getting the dollars, and if the overall dollars are down, that's a good starting point. And then we might take a little time and look, how much is the city doing, how much is the library doing, how much is the school district doing, and so forth. But the main thing is, do I have to spend more taxes this year or not? That's how it starts. We all feel that. So the important thing is to be careful in the calculation of the levy so that the rate is such, even if you are aiming for the same rate as the previous year, people may still spend more tax or have to pay more tax to you. May be just a few bucks, but at this point with our wealth growing, we should be looking at less dollars. And I think that's what the council feels. I think that's something that we want to engage all of our local taxing bodies in. But we've already opened that conversation with the library. Okay. We made it to the appendix. The staffing plan, again, there are three major components here. We update this every year in terms of, the glossary. The policies are the council's, and we continue to replicate those as they're changed from time to time. The chart of accounts is something that changes in modest ways every year, adding some new accounts, some new funds. And that's it. I welcome any questions you may have about that. If you go to page, a couple things to just look at. Page 240, you see that number one, about a third of the way down. The city prefers to keep its property tax rate as low as possible. It's interesting. So it says, we're going to levy for police, fire, and IMRF pensions per actuary calculations. We haven't levied for IMRF in some years because we haven't had the ability to do so without increasing the city's, the contributions people have to make to the city on an individual basis. We haven't levied for Social Security for a number of years because, again, we're trying to keep our rate down. General operations, none of our departments have seen any property tax coursing through just general operations, the budget for operations in a long time. And levy to fund additional personnel, I don't know. That's really an archaic thought. We haven't done that in a long time. So it's more than the city manager, if you look number 3, imposing spending limits. We're a ways from getting to that point where we can actually see property tax beginning to pick up these other pension obligations like IMRF and FICA. But we're going to get there, and hopefully in an equitable way in the coming years. And one last thing, page 232. Number 1, a meeting will be held with the Finance Advisory Committee after June 30th and before joint city council budget discussions begin to discuss the previous year-end comprehensive annual financial report, the CAFR, and review revenue trends and discuss any new policy recommendations, which is what we've done the last 3 years. And I look forward to working with you when we meet again.
Questions? Council, back, comments? Oh, Alderman Perkins.
I do have a couple, and I guess it's back in some of the detail in the general fund. Just looking at things that went up.
Which page?
By page 66.
Thank you.
I was looking at things that went up by what seemed to go up by a significant percentage, and there were 3 in particular, and I'm just looking for a little insight into them. Forestry Services, right towards the top, GL number 63100.
Yep, $100,000.
Yeah, I'm just kind of wondering what is behind.
That's,
some
so
of
we
that.
take down trees, damaged or dead trees, unhealthy trees and so forth. And we do what we can with our own street department crews, but as we get up into higher elevations, more complicated work, we hire that out. Some of you have had issues in your wards with trees, and it's something that we're just not keeping up with, and so that's why it's gone up a little bit.
So we're seeing an increase in that service in the coming
So,
year.
we've had a couple of different species that have had different blights, and we've been dealing with those, the ash, and help me, Andy, with some of the other.
In our neighborhood, the ashes have taken a beating
Yeah.
from the emerald ash borer.
There's another
borers.
type of species, isn't there, that we're also addressing?
There's a slight maple
Yeah.
with a soft maple.
Yeah. And years ago, we used to plant these in the public way, but these are sturdy trees, and they're right, the root systems are good, they're not gonna tear up our underground and all that, and now they're a problem, so. And we have to think creatively about the tree replacement program. We've not been very ambitious about that, but a lot of people, you take down a nice big tree with a good girth that people have enjoyed for generations. They like to start with something that's more than just a little thin sapling, so those cost money, as you know. So that's what that is about.
Okay. Then another one I had is on the travel expense.
Yep.
About halfway down the page.
Yep.
Goes, it's 66,300, going from, we're expecting it to end this year at 120,
Yeah.
and they're gonna take it to 157.
Travel expenses, I see 1,000.
It's training travel, right above it, 66.
Training travel,
right?
okay.
Yeah, 66,200, I'm sorry.
Yep. So, and Susan, you can help me with this. We, some of our sworn services, our firefighters and police officers have to attend continuing training, licensing and so forth, and we don't offer it in this building, in our building, so people have to go places, and we haven't changed our per diem costs for a long time. That's where that comes from. It's not wishful, it's not, hey, wouldn't it be fun to go here? This is mostly required stuff, and as a matter of fact, every department has seen me in the last couple of years and say, we really need to expand this. I've been reluctant with other things needful that we could do that, but there's a point of diminishing returns there where you have to keep people certified, licensure, and the like. So it's what the cost is. Costs have gone up. Gas has gone up, so that's what I'm getting. We may not spend all that, but I need to have something there. What I'm trying to do, and what we've all tried to do, is spend out of the right account. There are some that would just try to, they'll see one line item that looks a little fat, and another line item looks a little thin, take from the fat, whatever that is, even if it's not appropriate. We don't do it that way. So I'd rather show it, and if we don't have to spend it, we won't spend it. And there's two or three levels, well, 3 levels of review. There's if it's in fire police, for instance, then you're going to get a sergeant or shift lieutenant, and then you're going to get the department head, and it goes to the finance office, and there are probably 3 levels there, and ultimately it comes to me to sign. So there's probably, actually, if you think of it that way, there's maybe 3 in the department and 6 overall. So these aren't whimsical.
Okay.
And we have, by the way, one of the toughest but nicest people, but tough when it comes to, did you get your is this right? Did you get a purchase order for this? Check to make sure, wherever possible, that there isn't tax applied to things, if it's a per diem type of cost. Some of you recently, when you went to the IML conference, there was some questioning, I feel that. There's no getting around it. That's where the buck stops, and she's terrific at it.
Mayor. Yes, Alderman Burke. We're starting to see how census can impact budget. What is entailed to pursue a special census costs, collaboration with other governing bodies, et cetera, because if you look at some of our local data, it doesn't line up with a drop in population.
Right.
In our ward, for example, there aren't available apartments. There aren't really available homes for sale per se. So we look at other data, the number of calls for public safety. We look at school district enrollment. It's not really lined up with the drop in population, so I think it would really be a worthwhile endeavor for us to pursue that as soon as possible.
So, timing. We do know we want to capture students, and to ramp up something like that, it's probably a fall, in our college town, it's probably a fall activity. And we can see what's involved in that. If we had to come back and propose some possible costs for that and how we pay for it, we're happy to do that. I'd like to know, we're still getting, there are many layers to that census. We're still gutting some of the pieces of that. It's been a little busy with this budget to put together in the last 6 weeks, but I myself have just glanced at some of the budget data, the hard data, and I want to do a deeper dive and see what we're doing, have a more general conversation about affordability and things like that. And then we can jump in, get the census done.
Should we set aside any dollars out of this budget just in case? In other
No,
words, if we look at fall?
You can amend the budget, and we've got a reserve that, by the way, if we had to take something out of reserve, put it over here, we can do that. It's not a real large cost, but it's something.
It's a good question, though. Bill and I have talked about that if we're right, the payback on that is just a couple, 2-3 years. So definitely something that we want to look at, because the reward could definitely be there.
We need people to, even a big operation like the decennial census really had to scratch for enough people to go out and get that done. So we're going to have to hire people to do that. We can't do it ourselves. We don't have people.
Alderman Smith?
To lead on Alderman Perkins a little bit, I'm given the amount of calls I've gotten for Forestry Service, is this enough? I mean, Andy and I probably talked, I can't even begin to tell you how many people towards him. Much like Lynn said, with the ash trees, we talked about that earlier, about, is that enough? I mean, I know we contract that out and they get them in, masses, so that's one thing I'm a little concerned about, just based on the calls being the older wards.
Andy's in a better position to judge that than I am, but this is in the budget at that amount for a reason. He's pretty careful about these numbers.
Right.
And, not too hot, not too cold, it's about right where we feel it could be.
Okay, thank you. And training, if I remember correctly, for the police side, we had to increase the amount of training hours correctly?
Yes.
So that
According to
should
the
have
Safety Act, yes, we do.
Correct, adverse effect on our
Yes.
training budget.
That's correct. That's a good point.
And special census, didn't we do one in 2010? Tom, does that sound right?
It was not, well, 10 was a decennial, so it was, I think, around 12, something like
12,
that.
does that sound right to you guys?
12 or 13, something
Yeah.
like that, yeah, it was right after the 10 census.
Yeah, it's a couple of years. Anyway, just throwing it out there. Thank you, that's all.
Alderwoman Morse?
Oh, sorry, Tom.
Just on that forestry note and on the city manager's note of a, possibility for a more deliberate tree replacement plan, I think I'd like to see us maybe engage the Environmental Commission on that, and maybe they can get involved. I'd love to see those trees replaced.
Tom, did you have something, or no?
Yeah, assuming that we're going to wrap this up this evening, from an overall perspective, and the community who pays attention to this pretty carefully, just some overall comments. First of all, the presentation and the documentation provided is substantially improved over the last 3 to 4 years. Certainly our financial position has also improved substantially with the aid and assistance of the federal government. The fund balance growing to 45% is certainly a target that we struggled with to get to 25 for a decade. So to see this is a positive, and I think from a community perspective ought to view it that way. One concern just in general, one-time money is one-time money. So if we build an operating budget with increased staffing, I think the strategic plan, and one of the items on the strategic planning line in the document lists a bunch of things that we should consider, and one of those is a 5-year financial plan. And this has been talked about from time to time, but given Facebook and given these pension obligations and given these one-time monies are going to disappear, it might be prudent for us to try to do that in the next calendar year or sooner, prior to next year's budget, maybe, as a good foundation to get everyone comfortable, yourselves as well as staffing and all the operations folks, similar to the water thing, it has gotten itself into a very good position. And my only comment was going to be, there has been almost no discussion about the quality levels of water in our community, where not everyone can say that. And, you know, the excellent operations, and I recall there was a consultant here who helped develop the capital plan that led to the price increases that you approved, which is substantial to the community. Two things about that homework was that they did a comprehensive comparative of the water pricing in various communities. So there was a logical conclusion that our water rates were low and could stand this kind of planning effort and the increases. So it's nice to see something play out, and the community should benefit from that perspective, that the water system seems to be in an excellent condition and should be able to be maintained as such. I know they appreciate the roads improvement, and I know there's more necessary there than what we can generate. My only other comment from an overall perspective, as just a member of the Finance Committee, this whole pension issue and how we attack the taxes, the property tax aspect of this. We're kind of blessed now with Facebook coming in next year. That should generate an incremental tax of some 700,000-800,000, whatever that number is going to be. That should bring you pretty much in compliance and covering at least those two pension obligations that we've been talking about, when you include the TIF recapture that you have, plus the pilot money that comes from the water fund, and that's property, it's a tax in lieu of tax, right? So we're actually taxing our water assets, similar to if you had a third-party municipal water system, they would have to, a private party would pay you taxes, and this calculation is done in lieu of that to enable the fund, the general fund, and shore up property tax revenues, and that's what it's based on. So you add those things together, we're going to be close next year to covering that entire liability, at least for a year or two, before it then slips up again and will need to be addressed in the longer term. But just again, some positive comments about the overall positioning compared to where we have been.
Agreed on the 5-year plan. I mean, there are a lot of moving parts right
Yeah.
now. You know, with the, as you mentioned, the new economic development, the large-scale new economic development, the ARP money. I too would like to see just when those start rolling off, and then obviously we can project new economic development and see how it all, you know, gets offset. But I agree. I think that'd be something good for council. And then also, City Manager, I want to thank you and your staff. Reading the budget's like a narrative. I'm not going to say it's like a book where it's a real page turner, but it is just really informative because you do tell a story about each department and what has transpired over the course of the year. So I do enjoy, from all the budgets I've had to read, especially the ones when I was on the FAC, this one is very clear, and I think it gives us a lot of insight that normally council members may not have in the past. So thank you and your team for that. Anything else from council? FAC? No? All right, City Manager?
Thank you. We need to close the different
Yep.
portions of the meeting.
I just have adjournment, but they need to adjourn first, right, Ruth, and then us? Okay.
We need a motion.
Do I hear a motion to adjourn?
Motion.
Thank you. Is there a second? Thank you. Ruth, would you please call the roll?
Actually, you can ask for a voice vote.
Excellent. What about it, guys? What are you?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, yes. It's unanimous.
All in favor? Mayor?
I take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
It was moved by Alderwoman Morris, seconded by Alderman Favor. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Nay, same sign. We are adjourned.
Thank you.